Good morning, everyone. My name is Carolyn Hart Bennett, and I've written 2 books, 3 screenplays, 13 teleplays, and 1 stage musical, all based on a story I wrote 20 years ago called 7 Sisters. Today, I'm going to read to you Chapter 1B in my first book, 7 Sisters, The Voyage. Caroline Cleverly was from a wealthy family. She had been pampered all her 20 years, but she wasn't a snob. She was refined and beautiful in face and form. Her flaxen hair framed her face with curls, and her turquoise eyes, well, right now, dripped tears as she rode along in her grandmother's carriage. "Thank you for bringing me to the docks, Nan. I couldn't face leaving without you." "What precisely did your father say after you told him you were immigrating?" "He said that he and Mummy were adamantly opposed to my going to that place where depraved Mormons lived. He promised Peter and me the estate in Yorkshire as a dowry if I'd stay and give up my silly notions." "He's too worried about his standing in the Shire," Nan said with disgust. "I told him I loved Peter, but that he was not interested in the church and had broken off our engagement that very afternoon." "How heartbreaking," consoled Nan. "When I told Papa I had decided to go with the Mormons to Utah, he said that if I didn't change my mind, he wouldn't give me so much as a farthing for my inheritance. I told him I wouldn't stay if he gave me all he possessed." Oh dear, that was the wrong thing to say. Then Caroline sobbed as she spoke. "He and Mummy turned their backs on me. Oh, my poor child. Father told Jossie I could take whatever I could fit into one trunk. I was grateful for that. I sold my jewelry to get my passage ticket to New York. But after that, I don't know how I'll pay to move west." Caroline buried her head in Nan's shoulder. "Don't worry, dear. The Lord will help you," said Nan as she patted Caroline's head. "You are so brave to go to a new country with no friends or money and unaccustomed to hard work." Nan choked up just thinking about the hardships her grandchild would have to endure. "Oh, Caroline, how can I let you go? When I think of that ocean that will soon roll between me and my only granddaughter, my heart almost fails me." Now Nan was sobbing as they clung to each other. When the carriage slowed down and pulled to a stop on the wharf, Nan and Caroline didn't want to let go of each other, but somehow Caroline gained strength, drew back, and looked into her grandmother's eyes. "Nan, I've laid all my idols on the altar. There's no turning back now." "I've got something for you," said Nan, taking a carpet bag out of the coach. "Is there room in your trunk for it?" "What is it?" asked Caroline, opening it up. Inside were several items wrapped in linen napkins and secured with string. She carefully opened a package. "Oh, Nan, it's your Wedgwood china. How can you part with it?" "Well, if I can't go to the valley with you, at least I want my Wedgwood to go," she said, chuckling. "I've wrapped each piece twice, so I think they'll travel well." "Thank you, Nan. I love you so much. And thank you for introducing me to the missionaries last summer at your cottage." The two embraced again. "I fear this is the last time I shall ever see you," Caroline sobbed. "You never know, darling. Now wipe your eyes. You're going to be just fine. You're stronger than you think," she said as she dug into her pocket and pulled out a small black silk purse. "Remember when I said the Lord will help you?" "Yes," Caroline nodded. "Your mom slipped this purse into my hand when your father wasn't looking and asked me to give it to you." Caroline loosened the purse strings and gasped in disbelief as she reached in and lifted out a handful of gold coins. "Oh, my heart! Please tell her thank you and that I love her," said Caroline. "And tell Papa I'll miss him greatly." She gave Nan another hug and kiss. "Goodbye, dear Nan." Then raising her arms up high and turning a full circle, she shouted, not caring who heard her, "And goodbye, my native land." As soon as the governor inspector arrived on board the Amazon, the registration and doctor's examination of the immigrants began. Standing on a wooden box, the inspector announced through a megaphone, "Make sure the member of the party who is entrusted with the passage ticket has it ready in hand." Dickens stood behind the inspector. This would be an ideal spot to observe the immigrants up close. He was delighted that the first family to be processed was a family that was holding hands up the gangway. Jessie Jobson, Sophronia Jobson, Matilda Jobson, William Jobson, Jane Jobson, Brigham Jobson, Caroline Jobson, Charlotte Jobson, Leonardo Jobson, and baby Orson Jobson. Are you all here? Said the inspector as he peered over his spectacles. Dickens couldn't help but smile at this wonderful family. All here, said Jessie Jobson proudly. As Jessie's wife stood next to him, holding their sleeping baby in her arms, Dr. Bell, the ship's doctor, lifted the corner of the shawl, looked at the baby's face, and touched his little clenched hand. If we were all as well as little Orson Jobson, he slurred, doctoring would be a poor profession. The mother grimaced a bit because the doctor's breath was tainted with liquor. Take your ticket, Jessie Jobson, and pass on, said the inspector. President Palmer sat at a small table and took the ship's log information as each family filed past him and gave their family name, ages, and occupations. There were colliers, tailors, bootmakers, engine keepers, schoolmasters, masons, farmers, sawyers, carpenters, locksmiths, joiners, bone cutters, wheelwrights, and many more. The females answered with wife, widow, or spinster, spinster being any unmarried female over the age of 16. The inspector looked up at the next two in line, an older couple. The wife stood in front of the inspector, while her husband stood to her left, facing a nearby mast. The inspector noted this peculiarity. Samson and Dorothy Dibble? Your husband quite blind, Mrs. Dibble? Yes, sir, he be stone blind. Addressing the mast, Master Dibble added, Yes, sir, I be stone blind. That's a bad job. Take your ticket and your husband, Mrs. Dibble, and take care of both. Mrs. Dibble guided her husband to the next station, where Dr. Bell was starting to grow weary of his assignment. Taking one look at Mr. Dibble, he tapped him on the eyebrow with his forefinger and said, You'll do, and away the Dibbles went. A mother carrying her infant son and a father holding his 4-year-old daughter were next to be examined by the doctor. He could see the baby was sick as it was whimpering and squirming in its mother's arms. Feeling the forehead of the boy, he was startled by the hot touch. He pulled up the baby's little jacket and shirt and found what he suspected. The doctor wasn't too inebriated to realize there was a problem. He asked the family to follow him as they moved away from the registration area to where the inspector and Bramwell were consulting with Captain Hudson. Inspector, this is John and Catherine Scheib, said Dr. Bell. They have a sick child with a fever and a light rash on his stomach. He may have the measles or chickenpox. I recommend they wait to cross. Good sirs, please, John Scheib pleaded. We have waited 2 years to immigrate, and this is the last ship of the season. We must go now. I am very sorry, sir, said the inspector. President Bramwell took over. Brother Scheib, it is not wise to take a chance like this. Measles can devastate a ship. I promise that if you go home and get your family well, President Cannon will see to it that you are able to immigrate next season. Brother Scheib was abruptly awakened to the seriousness of his son's illness. I am severely disappointed, but will strive to be faithful and steady in the church. Godspeed, he said as he took his little family and moved down the gangway. Dickens hadn't expected to see this kind of drama today. You handled that situation very skillfully, President Bramwell, he whispered. I felt empathy for those people, but you had to think of the entire company. Looking serious, President Bramwell reflected. I hope we don't have anyone else with sickness get past the doctor. We must have a healthy voyage. Dickens felt a bit uncomfortable now and wanted to get back to the light-heartedness of his piece. He was almost finished with his notes, but had a few more questions and wondered if he could bring President Bramwell out of his worried state. Looking around, he saw families everywhere. Then he spotted about 20 young men all congregated at one end of the ship, laughing, talking, and waiting to be registered. I see quite a few men are going singly, Dickens ventured. Startled out of his daze, President Bramwell momentarily forgot what had just happened and brought his attention back to the interview. Most of them are returning missionaries from the various missions in England, or conferences as we call them. Many have families in the valley. And what about the single girls? Are they going out in quest of husbands? I've heard about this plurality of wives, but I see none of it manifest here. Bramwell knew the polygamy issue would come up sooner or later. It always did. He spoke without hesitation. There are a few worthy men in the valley who have taken more than one wife to help build up the kingdom, as did Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob of old. It's a higher law that only those called by the first presidency can enter. With that disclosure, Dickens' mind raised 100 more questions, but his thoughts were interrupted by President Sloan on the megaphone. Those crossing on the Perpetual Immigration Fund, please have your written recommendation ready and come to this line. About 20 families and various individuals shifted to the new line, where President Sloan began interviewing a poorly dressed family of 5. What is this Perpetual Immigration Fund? Asked Dickens as he and Bramwell moved to observe the new line. It's a revolving fund that is designed to deliver the honest poor, the pauper, if you will, from localities where poverty is a crime and beggary an offense against the law, and place them in a land where honest labor and industry receive a suitable reward. It provides their passage, but they are expected to pay it as quickly as they can when they get to the valley. It is not designed for the idler. Dickens listened to the next interview with a girl in her mid-20s. Her clothes were shabby and not as conservative as the rest of the women on the journey, and she looked a little out of place in her fashion. Her hair was auburn red and frizzy, loosely fastened. She was quite pretty, but her features were sharp, and she had a wanton look about her. The second she opened her mouth, Dickens placed her in the lower class of London. Her Cockney accent gave her away. She handed her paperwork to President Sloan. Lizzie Cornell from Hackney, he read. Yes, sir, within earshot of the bells of Bow, East End. Crossing alone? Yes, sir, by meself. The registration was starting to pick up, and the Saints were relieved when their examination was finished, and they could move to the bulwarks to spend their last remaining moments in England contemplating their homeland, their families left behind, and their future on the vast ocean. Dickens' writing was again interrupted when he noticed 2 men lugging a large black box out of the nearest hatchway. Marcus Fielding and George Careless were the bearers of the box, which was soon set down. Both men were in their 20s. However, Marcus was a tall returning missionary with dark wavy hair, and in contrast, George was an immigrating Brit who looked much older because of his diminutive size and already thinning hair. What do we have here? Asked Dickens. Hymn books, said Marcus as he pried the top off the box. We love to sing hymns of praise to the Lord, added George. Picking up a small hymnal, Dickens read from the cover, Sacred Hymns and Spiritual Songs of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, with a foreword by Brigham Young, Parley P. Pratt, and John Taylor. Turning to President Bramwell, he smiled hopefully. I'd love to hear a hymn. Then, totally surprising Dickens, President Bramwell immediately began singing, Ye elders of Israel, come join now with me. He only got the first phrase out before Marcus and George joined with him. And seek out the righteous where'er they may be, in desert, on mountain, on land, or on sea, and bring them to Zion, the pure and the free. O Babylon, we bid thee farewell. Then splitting into harmony and slowing down, they sang the last line. We're going to the mountains of Ephraim to dwell. Wonderful, wonderful, said Dickens, clapping enthusiastically. It was a fitting end to his interview. Then, as if being cued, Huntley came to the top of the captain's deck with a megaphone and announced, All aboard, who's going aboard? All ashore, who's going ashore? All ashore, not aboard. The inspector and assistants gathered up their documents, bid farewell, and left the ship along with the dockers who had completed their work below. Friends and family of the departing immigrants were loath to leave their loved ones and cried and clung to them as long as they could. Dickens turned and extended his hand. President Bramwell, thank you for being so helpful with all my questions. I believe I have a very positive essay for the Chronicle this month. I came on board to bear testimony against the Mormons, fully expecting to do so. But to my astonishment, they do not deserve it, and my preconceived notions must not affect me as an honest witness. I have found the Mormonship to be a family under strong and accepted discipline, with every provision for comfort, decorum, and internal peace. Godspeed to you and your company. Dickens then shook hands with Captain Hudson. I'll see you upon your return, Captain. Maybe we can dine at the Blue Boar and enjoy some spirits. I'll look forward to it. Have a safe voyage, Dickens said as he started down the gangway. President Bramwell turned to the saints. Brothers and sisters, let's have 3 cheers for Mr. Charles Dickens, a newfound friend of the Mormons. He started the cheer by yelling, Hip, hip, to which the company answered hooray. Hip, hip, hooray! Hip, hip, hooray! Hip, hip, hooray! Dickens smiled and waved broadly from the wharf as the saints finished the cheer. Raise the gangway and let's go aft, the captain ordered. The first mate, Mr. Huntley, repeated the orders, and the crew jumped to action, letting the lines go. The air seemed full of energy and excitement as the Amazon moved into the estuary. The saints were jubilant as the band struck up Land of Hope and Glory, and the immigrants waved hats and handkerchiefs to the crowd on the wharf, who in turn cheered and waved back. There were hundreds there to witness the rare occasion of an immigrant ship leaving from the London docks, and the fact that the Amazon was loaded with 800 Mormons made it even more of a curiosity. Dickens stood with the mass of people lining the wharf, and waved and hooped a few times himself. This event was much superior to the premiere of the Drury Lane Theatre, which he wrote about last month. The ship moved steadily out into the Thames. It was now far enough away from the dock that no one could possibly get on board, but it was still within earshot of the wharf. To testify to this fact, a hansom cab pulled up to where the gangway once lay, and an agitated woman jumped out. She swam through the crowd to the edge of the wharf, where she started shouting at the top of her lungs, Stop the ship! Stop the ship! My daughter has run away with the Mormons. I insist you bring her back. Her name is Eleanor Wise. The captain saw the woman on the dock, waving her arms like a rag doll in a windstorm, and wondered why she was so animated. He made a gesture to her by cupping his hand to his ear and yelled, I can't hear what you're saying. The band was eagerly playing the last chorus of its song. President Bramwell stood next to the captain. He couldn't make out what she was saying either. It seemed useless to try to communicate, but the band finally finished, and the mother yelled again, Captain, Captain, put Eleanor Wise in a longboat and send her back to shore. She does not have my permission to sail with you. Giving Bramwell a puzzled look, the captain inquired, President Bramwell, is there an Eleanor Wise on your passenger list? Bramwell turned to President Palmer with an equally bewildering look. President Palmer, is there an Eleanor Wise in your book? Palmer quickly scanned the pages. I see no Eleanor Wise registered here. Huntley came running with a megaphone and handed it to the captain, who put it to his mouth. Madam, I assure you that your daughter is not on board. I don't believe you, she yelled back. You kidnapped her. You haven't heard the last from me. You won't get away with this. I'll have my daughter, or you can all go to the bottom of the ocean together. And she angrily shook her fist in the air. The band leader, who was oblivious to all this hubbub, struck up the band again with a reverent rendition of God Save the Queen, and the immigrants lined the bulwark of the Amazon began to sing one last tribute to their homeland and their monarch, Queen Victoria. The people lining the wharf joined with them in the sentimental song. Dickens was luckily within a few feet of the woman who had been yelling back and forth to Captain Hudson, and knew his essay wouldn't be complete without an interview with this ill-tempered shrew. He stepped closer and addressed her. Madam, what makes you think your daughter is on that ship? The mother scowled. She left for work 2 mornings ago and didn't come back. She has an aunt and an uncle who have introduced her to this religious rubbish. And ever since they immigrated last year, she has been talking about sailing to America to join them. I, of course, refused to allow it, so I suspect she has planned her getaway with the help of the Mormon leaders. Then turning, she stomped off toward her cab, yelling, "Take me to the dock authority." Well, there's one woman who doesn't have a favorable impression of the Mormons, Dickens muttered to himself. What a fascinating day, he thought, as he hailed a cab to start the ride back to Covent Garden. As he rode along, he looked out the window and could see the Amazon being pulled along in the distance. The band was still playing, but the music was fading fast. He wrote his final thoughts in his notebook. What is in store for these immigrants? What happy delusions are they laboring under? I do not pretend to say, but I have a feeling that it is impossible to deny that so far some remarkable influence has produced a remarkable result upon these people. From what I can gather, the great object sought by the Mormons is the establishment of a mighty theocracy in the valley of the Great Salt Lake, where they may enjoy without fear of molestation the free exercise of their religious and social opinions. And that's the end of chapter 1b. Stay tuned for chapter 2. Over and out.